Yeah.
We're here now at the home of Dale Caldwell, Dr. Dale Caldwell.
Thank you, sir.
And it's just, awesome to know that you have accomplished a goal that you have been seeking for a long period of time, but that you've been able to do it while continuing your involvement with outreach and development. Mm-hmm. And it's outstanding to find that you open up your home to us. We're here now at Dale Caldwell's home with his lovely library in our backdrop. And one of the things that I have been able to marvel about you is the attitude that you have in wanting to articulate information that can be sustaining. Mm-hmm. Your relationship now as a doctor in the educational environment is going to really heighten a lot of those concerns that you have met in your positioning, your dialoguing, overall in creating the content that's necessary that we identify with looking towards the future. Let's talk a little bit about your dissertation and what it encompassed and why it's relevant.
Well, Herb, first, just thank you. I mean, I am so impressed with your ability to get things done, your commitment to communication in every sense of the word. I mean, radio stations, TV, video, interviews, you're a model of how to do it right. And so it's been an honor to work with you, and I've known you for years, but our work on tennis and other things has really been one of the pleasures. It really has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And so, my framework, Intelligent Influence, is all built on influence, that we're products of our influence, and that we do what we do, think the way we think, and accomplish what we accomplish because of influence. And so my dad, who knew and marched with Dr. King, my mom was a school teacher, are the biggest influences in my life. And now my 12-year-old daughter, Ashley, is now becoming a big influence in my life. And, they went through times, the segregation and other things and we're standing on their shoulders. And so often we take things for granted. And we don't realize that we are living in a great time. And there's so many possibilities. There's so many possibilities to do things. So part of what, in answer to your question, that I feel this commitment to really make change, to really make a difference in the world. My dad in marching with Dr. King and organizing marches, they made a difference. So the bar was set high, my influence. So it's not just enough for me to go to school and have a nice job and go to a nice car and have a nice house and do that stuff and take care of Dale and let everybody else take care of themselves. We have a responsibility to give back. And one of the things I love about you is your commitment to doing that. And through communication, hopefully we can inspire people to say, hey, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough to really go out of my way to give back? So my dissertation was really built around this index I created called the Living Wage Index. As you know, we started this middle class movement to build on Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. And MIT came up with this thing called a living wage calculator, which basically tells you anywhere, any county in the country, what a household needs to make to pay their bills.
Right.
And what I did is I took that for a municipality and came up with this thing called the Living Wage Index, which is basically the percentage of households that can pay their bills. And using regression analysis for my dissertation, we looked in Massachusetts at standardized test scores to see if there was any relationship, any correlation between the percentage of people who were poor in a community and how well students did on the test. And the amazing thing, Herb, and nobody studied this before, is that we could predict 71% of the language arts scores of students based on the poverty in the community. Nothing to do with the schools, not teachers, not anything, and 74% of the math scores. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, one of the significant things about that is one, high-stakes tests and used to evaluate don't really tell you whether someone's a good teacher or not. It has nothing to do with that, or very little to do with that. But more importantly, what I wanted to prove is that mayors of towns, and so often mayors, as you know, having been involved with politics, they'll say, hey, it's the school board. It's not my fault the kids can't read. The other parents. It's not my fault. I don't have anything to do with it. But what we're showing is that the mayor's #1 responsibility is to create jobs and economics in the community, and that actually can improve the school system. By a mayor, a council, politicians creating jobs and economic well-being, they actually can improve how well students learn.
So you can be able to use this concept to define a criteria that we have overlooked in relationship to accountability and representation. Focusing on it from that perspective. Again, you did touch upon a few issues that are interesting to discuss. Looking at it in terms of from the regression concept, and the idea that in most cases, the result of the argument when it comes to education, it always comes back to the home. Now, you were really educated very well. You went to Wharton, Seton Hall is where you did your doctorate. You've been able to manifest a very strong consciousness in going through the process of having a pattern of discipline that is going to, give you positive results. Why is your advantage so much more relevant to the relationship of the urban kid who has issues when it comes to becoming successful?
Well, and again, the intelligent influence model tells us that influence is everything. And the difference between me going to Princeton and me being a dropout joining a gang is influence. It's not that I'm any smarter than anybody else. It's not that I'm born a superior person. It's that I had influence. I had parents that made education a priority. I had parents who actually could pay the bills most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. And so many kids don't have that. And so as we start to think about policy, and one of the things that I haven't even talked to you about this, so one of the things I just really started, and on my dad and his birthday, I started something called the Dale Caldwell Foundation.
Oh, congratulations.
And there were processes going 501c3, but what it is not that I have a lot of money, but what I found is that if we get people to focus on the problem collaboratively, so one of the things we're doing, we have NewBrunswickReads.com, we have NewarkReads.com, we have TrentonReads.com, we have AsburyParkReads.com, and we started here in New Brunswick, where I live and on the school board. And what's happened is we get people to say, hey, it's not the teacher's fault, it's not the parents' fault, it's not the school board fault, it's not the community's fault, but we have a literacy problem.
Yes.
Let's come together around this, and guess what's happened? So we've had one teacher, Nancy Sanchez, who's donating money towards a bookmobile. So we're actually, all because of this idea, no money, we're starting to do a bookmobile. We're in conversations, I had talked to the mayor to see if there's any way we can get internet in those communities that don't have internet at the home so that people can start to really read at home.
And it's a growing trend.
And it's a growing trend. And so the thing is, people are good. I believe fundamentally that all of us have goodness in us. And so if we give them a chance to say, hey, it's not about blame, it's not about anybody getting paid, but we have a literacy crisis. Because if you look at these urban communities, Herb, 80% of the fourth graders don't read at grade level. And the research shows they're destined for unemployment, poverty, or worse. And so if we don't come together as a society to say, hey, forget the blame, let's set up programs to encourage kids to read and to learn, we can change the world. And it's amazing how people have responded just on this idea. And so we're starting to do it in Asbury Park, too. Matt Stevens, who we both know, is starting to do some things. We've done some programs, and we haven't gotten to Newark yet and Trenton, but that's on the docket.
If you're tuning in, I'm here with Dale Caldwell, Dr. Dale Caldwell. I don't know, I gotta get used to that, Dale.
I'm not used to it myself. I'm not used to it myself.
It's like just so much of a pleasure to have an opportunity to sit down and talk with someone with the wisdom that you have and that you've been really working with me, in particular, grassroots guy, just an average guy, having the kinds of skill and influence and involvement that you have, and still can be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. One of the ideas that I know that has been really relevant is defining those areas that we have pointed fingers at and looking for a solution. We came up with a conversation that you touched on sharing with me about the urban
traumatic stress disorder?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk a little bit about that and how that is going to be an accomplishment in your theory towards moving forward and helping literacy become something that we can be able to overcome?
Well, a good friend of mine, Christian Benedetto, I don't know if you've been, Christian is a real estate broker in New York in Newark, and he served in the military and has been very open about having PTSD. And he started something, he's very entrepreneurial and just a great guy. He started something called PTSD Journal. Okay. And they've asked me to help as kind of...
I do know Christian,
Yeah, you know Christian. So I'm kind of the Friends of PTSD, the foundation. So I'm kind of volunteering my time to help them with that. Okay. And so as we do that, it's not just military PTSD, it's also urban PTSD. In fact, we're in the process of doing an Invisible Wounds conference. And talking to some University Rutgers and some others about doing a conference and making it national to begin talk about those wounds that we don't see. And so one of the things that I wrote an article in that magazine about what I call urban traumatic stress disorder. When I was running a school in Trenton, it's 95% African American, what I found is that many of the kids live in environments where violence is commonplace, where there's unfortunately some abuse. And that changes the amygdala and hippocampus of the brain. And I realize that it's not post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not, it's not after. They're in it, then they go to a nice school, and then they go back into it. So I really call it urban traumatic stress disorder. And so as we study the brain in neuroscience, and I've talked to Princeton Neuroscience and some others, I've partnered with a good friend, Clarissa Romero, who has Mindful Consultants, and we're actually using mindfulness, because mindfulness, spending time with yourself, spending time in the present, actually changes the brain back, the amygdala and hippocampus, so that kids who have trouble focusing because of UTSD or stress can actually learn to focus. Any kids. And so often, and my consulting firm, Strategic Influence, we're starting to work with teachers to really help them understand that if kids are misbehaving in class, it's not because they're bad seeds. They may be dealing with some trauma, and there are ways to really respond to that. That in most schools, most teachers aren't really equipped with dealing with those issues, so they're frustrated. And we're trying to help people and teachers through that process.
When you do mention about the mindfulness exercise project and, the culmination of it, it's something that's been around for a long period of time, but it is very organic, and the humanistic value of it has shown tremendous results. The opportunity to be able to connect it with this idea of a middle class movement seems to be very relevant. How is the approach being handled?
Well, and so, one of the things is, as you know, and you've been a big part of this, is that, the middle class is disappearing. That the rich and the poor, are growing, while the folks who are solidly middle class are struggling. And there are a lot of reasons about that. And part of why I do what I do is my first job out of Wharton was at Deloitte Consulting. And one of the things you learn in the management consulting profession is how to look at problems. And so often we deal with symptoms of problems. Government will say, well, we'll never solve the problem, so let's just do incremental change. The trouble is that you don't really make real progress if you do incremental change. You really have to think about we don't know whether it's realistic or not, but what should be, what should happen. And so I've taken that outside of just the corporate context, but in the global context to say what should be. And so if we want to have a strong global society, a strong U.S., strong urban communities, we have to have a strong middle class. And yet there hasn't been much discussion about that. And so the middle class isn't just economics. The middle class deals with emotional issues, education issues, health issues. And so what we're doing is creating this conversation around the middle class and this movement to, one, have measurement. What's the percentage of poor people in the community? What's the percentage of reading levels and those types of things? But also to begin to force companies to realize that in this country we need to move from a profit maximization focus to a jobs maximization focus. And so the idea is it's the old thing, it's economy stupid. Well, it's jobs stupid.
Jobs stupid.
It's because, and again, with my dissertation, as I said, jobs will increase the test scores.
Correct.
So, jobs obviously increase, reduce unemployment. So we need to begin to focus. So you're starting to see companies, and this is part of the challenge of Wall Street, is that companies that are looking to eliminate waiters and waitresses to save a few dollars.
Right.
When you go to the grocery store and the bag of potato chips is half full,
right,
and somebody wants to make some more quarterly profits. Yeah. That doesn't help anybody other than people who invest shares. America is going to have to pay for that person who's unemployed. Right. So this isn't conservative or liberal. This is really about, if you focus on a jobs economy and you start incentivizing small businesses to hire people, then you create jobs and you create a higher economic base who can actually buy. So if you're wealthy, you want people to have jobs so they can buy from you. Right. So there's really no reason not to really push this idea that jobs should be number one.
Well, when we talk about jobs, again, it comes back to the idea of where do we begin to focus the attention of interest in being educated. Domesticated jobs are becoming now more of an android, to say the least. Right. The Wookiee in Star Wars is real now. And a lot of those technologies are taking on the domesticated opportunities that existed. Where do we need to begin to focus the learning so that our youth can have a future in the next millennium?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in STEM and even STEAM, so, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. That's important. That's critical, that the young people need to do that. But I also challenge this idea that, that we have to use technology for everything. I think if we really take the mentality, there are enough jobs. If government was focused on a jobs mentality, there are enough jobs that we can create from everything from you know, we talk about the infrastructure, the national infrastructure. We talk about cleaning up communities. We talk about service jobs. You know, the senior citizen population is growing to really have people do that. So you want technology, but I think it's false to say that the only new jobs are going to be technology. That's assuming that we have a profit maximization economy. So it's better to have a robot do it than to have people do it. Well, that's not necessarily good for society. And government's responsibility is to determine whether that's good for society. Just because GM automates, that's not necessarily good for anybody but GM. So we need to start challenging, and one of the things with the middle class movement.
Challenging, I like that. Yeah, you're right. We just take it as it comes.
We
said, no, let your kid figure out what he wants to be when he grows up, and then you take the advantage of directing them, and next thing you know, they're in jail because they did what they wanted to do and didn't know how to do it.
And couldn't pay their bills.
Yeah.
So the thing about the middle class movement is that we don't realize, and we allow media and others to tell us that the power is in the White House. The power is in Washington. The power is in. So if you look if you really look at what happened, so you look at Fox News, you look at Bill O'Reilly, the most popular show on TV. They didn't get rid of him because he was just a bad guy. They got rid of him because they lost money. Because people didn't want to support him. So we don't realize how much power we have. The whole Ivanka Trump, was taken away from one of the retail stores because people didn't want to buy it. So we need to start using our economic power to say, hey, we don't have to support automation. We don't have to support this car company. And so what you will see is that, having been a consultant to major companies, companies will respond to the customer. And the customer drives the company. The company doesn't drive the customer. And if we think that it's all about saving a buck, and so one of the, there's a famous retail chain that gets all these tax breaks, comes into a community, closes all the local shops, and doesn't pay as well as some other companies. So people save $1 here, $1 there. They don't realize they're paying more in taxes because they've lost the tax base from the local hardware store and other folks. So we need to really look at this economy from the eyes of the middle class, and things can change.
Looking at it in that regard, and how we have been able to focus collectively on ways to invite people to be a part of it, the middle class movement. We're talking about doing conferences and really bringing out some kind of opportunity to generate an existence of interest. We're looking at it also from a fun perspective. You being a former president of the United States Tennis Association in this area and in this region, and being able to manifest a lot of activity when it came to the urban community, have looked at how tennis can also be an effective model. Let's talk about what we have been able to do together, because you really attracted me from what I saw from an incredible history that you have already developed in New York, and then we brought it to New Jersey. What can we be able to do to ensure that that development can be existent in this model?
Well, first, Herb, and again, you've been such a partner on the tennis thing, and so I grew up with tennis, and a lot of people don't realize in the black community, tennis and baseball were the two biggest sports, 100 years ago. And so I did an exhibit with the International Tennis Hall of Fame called Breaking the Barriers, a history of blacks in tennis. And so there's a history, and so a lot of the ministers, my dad and my grandfather were ministers, so we had a tradition of playing tennis. And so tennis opened doors for me. But the thing about tennis, which is really important, is that it helps with emotional development. And so I always was attracted to tennis because of that. And then I became the first black president of the USTA Eastern section, and really saw that there was a real need for tennis to be much more diverse. I joined the USTA board, which gave me some insight into pro tennis. And so, as you know, I started in 2013, the New York Open. You became part of this team, a very active and important part of the team. And the whole idea was to expose people to the great sport of tennis for free, so that they had access, because the U.S. Open is an amazing event. It actually has greater economic impact than all the Yankees, Mets, Rangers, and Knicks games on New York City. And it nets $180 million or so. So there's a real interest in an economic engine behind the tournament. The trouble is, a lot of people can't afford to go. So the New York Open, which is at Central Park now, is free. It's going to be the weekend before July 4th, June 30th through the 2nd this year. And what we're doing there is we're trying to, one, expose people to the great sport of tennis, but now we're introducing music. we really want to have what we call the Global Tennis and Music Tour, to really have the tennis during the day and some musical events in the evening, to really kind of identify up-and-coming people who are tennis players, pro tennis players, but also future star musicians. Because one of the things that we find is that there's so much undiscovered talent that is really not cultivated. And one of the challenges, if you listen to the major radio stations, they play the same 10 artists all the time. I like a lot of their music, but they're a whole lot more talented people than the 10 artists that we can all name. And so what we're trying to do is really kind of use that to really get a popular base to really expose to tennis, but also to generate some revenue that we hope to use to support community tennis programs, but also to support literacy programs. So we're making those are two things, community tennis and literacy, as an outgrowth of the tour. Which
opens up another conversation in regard to the We Care Partners network broadcast system, which is what we're going to begin to do to dynamically bring that area of media into perspective and to be able to grow an economy from it. Because, you know, what's been difficult in the urban community is that folk are not able to afford, you know, the quality that's necessary for their kids to participate.
Right.
But we have learned that the United States Tennis Association has created a whole new dynamical model for urban kids to get actually involved.
Absolutely.
And to be able to base it on a development model that will give us the income we need. So it's really interesting for you to share with us the idea of both the middle class movement, how tennis can be effectively a part of it in the approach, simply because of the relationship that has already influenced the urban communities, you know, through different types of amateur athletic union organizations and, you know, methods that have really not gotten a strong hold over this problem that we're having. You believe that tennis is going to help build that kind of a promise?
Well, one, I mean, the people in tennis are, I've just, you know, just amazing people who are involved. And a lot of people are, you know, tennis is often old money. You know, a lot of people who are involved in tennis have, you know, have come from wealthy families generation after generation. And so many of the folks who are playing tennis have resources and actually do care about, you know, communities that are struggling. And so tennis opens a door, a window to people with some resources tied to, and smart people understand that when the middle class shrinks, everybody suffers. You know, wealthy people will suffer and poor people suffer, of course. And so tennis, which kind of connects to this community with this idea of the middle class, with this idea of literacy, you know, all comes together. So it all seems these things are disparate, that they're not connected, but they really are, because we are a common people. We are a people, and you know, what did Dr. King say? You know, and I think Gandhi, you know, said something very similar, that we're only as strong as you know, as the most vulnerable in society. And so we, as a community. So one of the other things which we haven't talked about is, so I'm president of the largest special needs school district, the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey. That Mark Finkelstein, the superintendent, is outstanding.
Is this recent?
No, I've been president for 15 years.
Oh, really?
So ESC&J. So
okay.
We were Middlesex County, then Middlesex Regional, now we're the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey. So kids that are multiply disabled, kids that are on the autism spectrum, and kids that have emotional challenges. Kids that are kicked out of traditional public schools actually often come to our school. So it's really kids that are often, you know, have a lot of challenges to educate. And so we're really focused on those kids as well. And so they're working on a program of 21 and over, that, you know, there's funding for education under 21, but over 21, they're kind of left on their own. And so that part of society is so important. And what we're finding is that a lot of those the young people are great workers. And so we've teamed with Wrangham and the Parikh Foundation, and they are starting what they call a Let Us Connect Farm. And the Dale Caldwell Foundation is really one of the supporters raising money to do that. And so they're, and Acres in Montgomery Township, behind the CEO of this company, they're looking to create a farm that will feed the local restaurants, but employ students on the autism spectrum and teach them how to work and help them, give them, you know, viable jobs. And they've also started something called Spectrum Careers to really help folks in the autism spectrum actually get jobs with GE and Johnson & Johnson and other major companies. So part of my view is that we're all in it together, whether we're wealthy, whether we're special needs, whether we're poor, whether we're middle class, you know, and if you think of things, and one of the things I learned too in consulting, Herb, is that so often we compartmentalize problems. We say, okay, this is an environmental problem, this is an education problem, and this is an economic problem, this is a housing problem. The trouble is they're all integrated. They're all interrelated. And so when I was deputy commissioner at DCA, it frustrated me that human services talked here, and then environmental protection did this, and DCA did housing, and there wasn't much cross-fertilization, yet we were serving the same people. Why not try to figure out, and that's the best way to use resources, to come together and look at these problems together and say, and that's why the middle class discussion is so important, because that becomes the vehicle to talk about all the problems. And the example in tennis is, and you'll pick this up, so often we look at policy as if we're looking at a tennis match, and all we talk about is his forehand. So, okay, his forehand. So we say, okay, what else? He needs to improve his forehand. He needs to improve his forehand. Well, we don't talk about him winning. So think about policy. It's all about the forehand or the backhand or the serve, or instead of really, and so the middle class is the game. Right? The whole game is about the middle class. That is the job of politicians, is to grow the middle class. So it doesn't matter if it's environmentally or educationally. And so if we think of things that way, and it's just, God's kind of given me this is the way I think. I like to put all things together. So if we focus on that as the central measure of success, we can solve world problems.
You've had an opportunity to be successful dealing with high-level decision-making opportunities. You were one of the starters of the great program in Newark, and you've been actively involved in the charter movement. You're right now working to help elevate a charter school here in the area, and you're still actively involved as a member of the school board. Is charter better?
Well, again, tonight I get installed as president of the New Brunswick Board of Education. So I'm actually president of three boards of education now. I'm president of the Greater Asbury Charter School, president of New Brunswick Board of Education, and president of the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey. And so I think it's wrong to have this. I'm for charters. I'm against charters. I'm for traditional public. I'm against. It's about kids. And I think part of the problem with education in general is that there's more focus on adults than there is in kids. And so in all three of the schools I'm involved with, we have a wonderful superintendent, Aubrey Johnson, here in New Brunswick. There's a clear focus on kids. Mark Finkelstein, the superintendent of the ESC and J, it's on kids. We're going to start in September with this charter school in Asbury Park. It's on kids. And so the whole idea is not to fight the Asbury Park school system or the New Brunswick school system, or it's really to say what's best for kids. And we need to, one of the challenges in education, which in business you will fail if you don't have a research and development arm. If you're not looking on what's the next best thing, you're not going to succeed. In public education, we need a research and development arm, and that's really what charter schools are. They're the R&D that should work hand in hand with the traditional schools to say, hey, you can't try this, let's try a model. I mean, one of the first ones I was involved with was a boarding school, the Proctor Academy School in Trenton. And so the trouble is the state wouldn't give any money for the residential, so we actually voluntarily had to close it down because we couldn't raise the money. But some kids need to be in an environment that's conducive to learning. And some parents want them to do that because the kids will deal with this urban traumatic stress disorder. So charter schools should be able to, let me try this boarding model. And maybe it works, and maybe we do it in Trenton. Or let's try another curriculum, or let's try. So we as a society, because we're so focused on one thing, need to start thinking about the well-being of kids. And when 80% of the kids don't read, we've got to try something new. And we're not blaming teachers, we're not blaming parents, but we got a problem, Houston.
Well, when you have the politics involved, and one of the reasons why I had to really step back and look at what was going on, a lot of the interest has been in creating a competition on the public level of education. And my inspiration is to feel that education should have an equal standing for all of the kids. Do you think that the competition is really helping to destroy the problem, or is it making it better?
Well, it's really money. I mean, what happens is, and this is where government, is not wise. They're basically taking, they're basically throwing money at the table and saying, fight for it. And so they're creating this chaos. I mean, if the money didn't flow through the local school districts, there'd be no problem with the unions and charter schools. In fact, the unions are now trying to unionize a lot of charter schools. Even though they badmouth a lot of charter schools, they're still trying to unionize them. So the funding is wrong. And so, I mean, the funding really should be, and so often we have this short-term view, Herb, is that we need to make investments. And so what the state government, I don't ever want to be a politician. If I ran for governor, one of the things I would say is, this money should be carved out away from the traditional public schools and invested in charter schools to try something new. Don't take it out of the traditional public school, put it in here and invest in the money. And guess what? If you make the right investments, it'll save money in the long run. Because remember, when kids aren't reading in 4th grade, that's setting up a use of the welfare system. That's going to cost you down the road billions of dollars because you didn't educate the kids properly. So when we're not educating the kids properly, and you don't have to care about the kids, I care deeply about the kids, but if you care about economics, you're foolish if you don't understand that making sure that every kid that's capable of reading at grade level is reading at grade level will save tax dollars in the long run. Anybody who doesn't understand that is frankly an idiot, you know, to be honest. And I'll be frank. And so many people don't want to think about, you know, and the problem with elections is that everybody's focused on getting reelected.
Yeah.
They're not really thinking about the long term, because I'm not going to be here 20 years, so why do I worry about that?
Yeah.
But that's why we're stuck where we are.
Well, I tell you, we got a lot cut out. The answer now is to get involved and get actively into what is going to help develop the positive creation of a future for especially our society. It's a pleasure once again. I think that we have had a number of different conversations together, and each one of them have been powerful. And I'm really, really impressed behind your home. It's a lovely home.
Well, thank you.
And that you would invite us in so that we can have an opportunity to share with our viewers your interest in wanting to make things better. I appreciate you, Dale, and we want to look forward to what we're going to be doing. I think our first opportunity to have an involvement will be at the tennis courts in New York for the New York Open during the 4th of July weekend. And then we're going to progress into the Newark Open.
Yep.
Wait, before the Newark Open, we have the New Brunswick Open.
Yeah, New Brunswick,
we'll be able to work with that,
you
know, with our good friend.
Larry Dillon. Larry Dillon. Yeah. Larry's
who's over there and making it work. And we want to be able to share with everyone in our community some of the great moves that we're going to be making to identify with this excellent dissertation and motivation that we heard from the Dr. Dale Caldwell. All right, so thanks again, Dale.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Absolutely. Okay, and thank you for tuning in.